Then David fled from Naioth at Ramah and went to Jonathan and asked, "What have I done? What's my crime? How have I wronged your father that he's trying to kill me?" "Never," Jonathan replied. "You're not going to die. Look, my father doesn't do anything, great or small, without letting me know. Why would he hide this from me? It isn't so." But David took an oath and said, "Your father knows very well that I have found favor in your eyes," and has said to himself, "Jonathan must not know this, or he'll be grieved. Yet as surely as the Lord lives and as you live, there is only a step between me and death." Jonathan said to David, "Whatever you want me to do, I'll do it for you." So David said, "Look, tomorrow is the new moon fest, and I'm supposed to dine with the king. But let me go and hide in the field until the evening of the day after tomorrow. If your father misses me at all, tell him, David earnestly asked me my permission to hurry to Bethlehem, his hometown, because an annual sacrifice is being made there for his whole clan. If he says, 'Very well,' then your servant is safe. But if he loses his temper, you can be sure he's determined to harm me. As for you, show kindness to your servant, for you have brought him into covenant with you before the Lord. If I'm guilty, then kill me yourself. Why hand me over to your father?" "Never," Jonathan said. "If I had the least inkling that my father was determined to harm you, wouldn't I tell you?" David asked, "Who will tell me if your father answers you harshly?" "Come," Jonathan said, "let's go into the field." So they went there together. Then Jonathan said to David, "I swear by the Lord, the God of Israel, that I will surely sound out my father by this time, the day after tomorrow. If he is favorably disposed toward you, will I not send you word and let you know? But if my father intends to harm you, may the Lord deal with Jonathan. May it ever so severely. If I do not let you know and send you away in peace, may the Lord be with you, and as he has been with my father. But show me unfailing kindness like the Lord's kindness as long as I live, so that I may not be killed. And do not ever cut off your kindness from my family, not even when the Lord has cut off every one of David's enemies from the face of the earth." So Jonathan made a covenant with the house of David, saying, "May the Lord call David's enemies to account." And Jonathan had David reaffirm his oath out of love for him, because he loved him as he loved himself. This is the word of God.
Thanks be to God.
And today's message is delivered by Reverend Dr. Jonathan. And the message is Unfailing Kindness, Unfailing Friendship.
It's wonderful to be with you here today, this morning, and to worship God together. So this is sort of the second time I've preached in this book of Kings, the book of Samuel. And I shared last week that my brother is David, right? He's my guga, he's my big brother. And we have two sons, Samuel and Eli. And they're all part of the same story in the book of Samuel and then later on in Chronicles and Kings. So my parents named my brother David and me Jonathan because they really wanted us to be friends. Just like the characters in today's story. And David and Jonathan's friendship is one of the only examples like this in the Bible. I don't know exactly if it worked for me and my brother at first. But actually my brother was like 6 years older than me, so when I was little, I wanted to do everything he did. You know, if he was Darth Vader for Halloween, then I was the little Darth Vader. If he had Spider-Man glasses, I wanted Spider-Man glasses. If he asked for a present for his birthday, I would ask for it for my birthday. So you wouldn't necessarily expect David and Jonathan to be friends in the Bible, but they really are probably one of the best examples we have of this kind of friendship. So Jonathan's father is Saul, the reigning but doomed king of Israel. And David initially finds favor with Saul, right? Some of you probably know the David and Goliath, the stories of how David wins favor with Saul and helps defeat the enemy. And David even marries Saul's daughter. But in time, Saul catches on to the fact that God is passing him over and intends to give the reign to Jonathan. Saul is passing over, he and his family, and will give the reign to David. So normally this would go to Jonathan, right? Like normally Jonathan is like the crown prince in the story. So you wouldn't expect David and Jonathan to be friends. You would expect that maybe there would be some competition between them. So last time I preached, I talked about the challenges of nepotism, that often in the Bible, the father-son relationship doesn't work out well. I talked about Eli, whose children caused so much trouble in the selection of young Samuel. And in some ways, last week's sermon was kind of a sermon on some of the dangers of leadership. Don't choose people for leadership because they're just like you, or don't ignore corruption in yourself or in your family or in your community, right? Speak the truth, even when it's difficult. Don't be surprised when God calls somebody that you would never expect to be the leader. So this month, I want us to think together about David and Jonathan's friendship and sort of the positive example it gives us. That just because people expect you to be the king doesn't mean God has called you to be the king. Or just because others expect you the king doesn't mean that you have to be the king. So sometimes loyalty to God can even mean disobeying family. And sometimes God puts friends in our lives to protect us or help us just when we're in danger. God's covenant with us helps us in our covenant with others. And Jonathan and David are loyal to each other and to God. And as we saw in today's story, it's their friendship that saves David's life. I think in contemporary society, the way we are friends is changing. And I sometimes really envy some of my Taiwanese friends who have had friends for their whole life, like they went to preschool together and Xiaoxue and middle school and high school and college, and they've known each other a long time. Often I'll meet people kind of my grandparents' age, and they'll have friends they've known for like 70 years or something like that, or 80 years. They've been friends since the 1930s or 1940s. And I think today a lot of us, our friendships are really dispersed. So I have no friends probably from before about the age of 12 because I moved around. And many of the ones I know from high school or college, I haven't seen in 20 years, unless you count on Facebook. So this is another way our friendships have changed. We know a great deal about a friend, but we never actually see them, maybe, right? So the idea of friendship is a wonderful thing. And I always found, I remember I took Chinese history once, and we learned about the 5 relationships. I don't know how many of you have heard of the 5 relationships in Chinese history. It's like ruler and ruled is one. It's parent and child is the second. It's husband and wife. It's the older and younger sibling, and then it's friends. And I remember like when we talked about it in history class, they said that friendship was the one kind of even, equitable role there. Like it was the one where you were even together and you could really care for each other. It wasn't one above and one below. So I remember thinking that was really interesting. So I think sometimes friendship provides something that helps us to stay balanced. It's different than any other type of relationship we have. Friends are a sounding board. They're a source of encouragement. They're people who can speak to us honestly. Recently, people have coined a new term. I don't know if you all have ever heard of this. It's called frenemy. Have you heard of that? F-R-E-N-E-M-Y. It's like half friend and half enemy. And the way it came up is a frenemy is somebody that you kind of compete with. It's somebody who's a friend, but maybe they're also a rival. So I know in high school or college, I'd sometimes have friends where we never intended to, but we'd end up competing for like the same, it was maybe there was one scholarship or there was one officer for the speech team or something. There'd be some role, and it always kind of put some stress on the friendship, right? Like you never really wanted to be competing with your friends. And I remember, like one time I applied for the same scholarship, and I got it, and I could tell my friend was kind of upset. And then maybe another time, we'd both go for the same leadership role, and that friend would get it. So in each case, it's easy to let hard feelings get in the way of friendships, right? That's why we make up these new terms. And then another one I've heard recently, I probably should have spelled this out. It's from a German word. It's called Schadenfreude. That's like a really long word. We don't have this idea in English. And the idea of Schadenfreude is it's the happy feeling you get when something bad happens to someone else. I don't know if if anybody's ever had that feeling before. I can tell you I definitely see it with my own children, right? Like, for instance, if Eli gets in trouble and has a timeout, Samuel is just ecstatically happy. It's like the happiest you've ever seen him. Like he tries not to look happy, but his little brother, his little Didi, is in trouble, and it makes him really, really happy. So I think like this idea of frenemy and Schadenfreude, they point to how easy it is to undermine relationships, like how easy it is to let competition or envy get in the way of our friendships. And it's easy to feel like someone else's success comes at our expense, right? It's easy to feel like if somebody else is doing well, it maybe hurts how I feel about myself. And in some ways, that's kind of what you would expect in the story today. You'd expect that of David and Jonathan, that there can only be one king, right? Like this is the way it works out in history, is either Eli's sons will be the priests or Samuel will be the priest. Between David and Saul, it has to be one or the other. Either David is called to be king or Saul will be called to be king. And actually, it's the same with David and Jonathan also, right? That one of them will be the king. It would either be, if it passed from Saul to Jonathan, then Jonathan would become king. And if it passed from Saul to David, then David would become king. So when Israel elected to have a king, it meant that this was going to be the way it was, that there was going to be this competition between father and son, between brother and brother, and sometimes between friend and friend. It would produce centuries of frenemies, of people who should have cared for each other, but instead they were always competing. So I think the story of David and Jonathan is so wonderful because it shows how deep friendships can go and that it can choose the right path over family or personal interest. That other princes would have seen David as a threat, but Jonathan defends him just so strongly because he's his friend. In the reading today, the two friends even make a covenant. Usually we distinguish a covenant from a contract, right? A contract is something that you can enter into or leave. Usually it has kind of a time limit on it. It's for a year or 3 years. And you're basically looking out for your own interests, right? Or it's sort of to protect everybody's interests. It's to say, how much will I buy this product for and how much will you sell it for? Or what work do you want me to do and what work am I required to do? But a covenant is different. It holds both of our interests up to God, and it asks for God's blessing and guidance. The contract is no longer just between you and me for our own interests. It's between us and God for the well-being of the whole world. So here's what verses 16 and 17 they say. So Jonathan made a covenant with the house of David, saying, "May the Lord God call David's enemies to account." And Jonathan had David reaffirm his oath out of love for him because he loved him as he loved himself. So David and Jonathan's brotherhood, their friendship is reinforced through their oath, their covenant between each other and God. And this idea of covenant's a really interesting one in history. Kind of as an aside, my next door neighbor in grad school is the current principal of Taiwan Seminary. His name is Chen Changren. And he was looking for how do you find the idea of covenant in East Asian society. And one of the things he looked at was the idea of sworn brotherhoods, which I had never heard of before. Have you heard of those? It's like How do you say sworn brotherhood? Is it this one, right? It's like Jie Bai Shong Di. I see it like in the martial art movies. They have the sworn brotherhoods, right? And there's a famous book called The Water Margin where there are these rebels come together and they take an oath between each other to sort of resist the ruler. And in the Bible, I would say there aren't a lot of friendships like this. Like I was trying to think of close friendships in the Bible, and I couldn't think of a lot of them. I don't know. Can you all think of friendships? Probably missing some. But I was just really struck by how close David and Jonathan are as friends, and how often their friendship is stronger than that of the brothers in the Bible, right? Like brothers in the Bible are often doing all sorts of terrible things to each other and really competing with each other. So I think the story of Jonathan and David can be a guide for us in seeking to be friends to each other and to care for those around us. So today I have sort of 3 prayers for us related to friendship. The first is that I really hope we'll be friends for each other. The second is that I hope that our trust in God will inspire us to trust in each other rather than to compete. And a third is that we'll encourage friendships between like-minded people and institutions. For instance, this church and the seminary where I teach. So I hope that our friendships can inspire the best in us and also the best in others. So first, I just wanted to say that one of the things I really admire about EM is the sense of friendship in it. One of the things which I'm grateful for is that we all here today really are friends to each other and care for each other. One of my seminary students visited EM. I think she's interning with like the Taiwanese and youth service, and she came to EM one day and she said, it's like a family. It's not like a lot of other church services she'd been at. She said EM feels like a family to her. And it's true. You all know each other pretty well, and I can see that you really love each other, that you care for each other. I remember, I guess it was about a month ago, during Jerome and Mary's wedding, I was with the kids out in the coffee area, and I just remember how fun it was to watch people come in and greet each other and go into worship together, and then to watch them come out and talk to each other, that there was a real sense of friendship and care for each other. So, of course, I know with friendships even we'll still make mistakes, right? Sometimes people will feel left out or forgotten. Sometimes we may pass into frenemy territory or feel a little schadenfreude. But generally we do our best to show God's love to all. And we value each other because we're all children of God. And we value each other for who we are, not just for what we can kind of do for each other. So just like David and Jonathan, we can promise friendship to each other and hold ourselves accountable to each other and also to God. So one of the dangers I often see in mission is that we so often get focused on starting with a plan and then thinking that friendships will develop later on. And often how we do something matters more than what we actually do. Like often if we start from friendship or if we start from caring for each other, we'll have better mission later on. So I think we can begin with loving our neighbor and seeking to be a friend to others. If we do this, then often the mission does take care of itself. On the other hand, if we see people as tools rather than as friends, we make a big mistake. So be friends to others and love them just as God loves them also. So secondly, I've been thinking a lot about kind of the different paths to leadership and sort of different expectations for leaders. And one of the things that I love about the scriptures is that God's call can take so many different forms, and it's just entirely unpredictable. I don't know if you've had, it's like you start reading the story at one point, and then it turns into a direction you'd never seen. So once we were talking about in class how often in the Bible it's the little brothers that come out on top. You know, I was thinking about this because I'm the little brother, so I always like that part. Isaac and Jacob and Joseph and David and on and on. And my teacher, and this Bible teacher said, that's part of where the excitement comes from, that God often picks the unexpected leader. So One of the ways that the biblical Jonathan has helped me as a Jonathan is through his love of God and others. That Jonathan shows zero resentment of David. He has no fear of his father, and he trusts entirely in God's plan. And these are virtues that I really wish that I had and that I wish for others also. Sometimes I wonder what it was like for for Jonathan to carry all the expectations people put on him, right? That they expected him to be king and to be a leader, and they probably flattered him and sought his favor. And at times in my life, I've often found other people's expectations to be pretty stressful. I don't know if you all feel this way. I'm a pastor's kid, so pastors' kids are supposed to be really good, and I think as a teacher, sometimes people kind of put you on a pedestal that the words that come out of your mouth are coming directly from God or something. So I always feel like sort of stressed out by that. But what I love about Jonathan is that he doesn't do things for himself. He does them out of his love for others. And I love the phrase that in one of the translations that talks about how Jonathan only asks for David's unfailing kindness. I love that phrase, and it says that Jonathan loved David as he loved himself. And this, of course, is what Jesus asks for us also, to love our neighbors as ourselves. So in Matthew 22 and Mark 12, it talks about love your neighbor as yourself. So I just am impressed that Jonathan's able to do this. It's not, when I look at Samuel and Eli, it's hard for them to love each other as themselves. How much harder is it for us sometimes to love people who we don't know as well or who aren't family? So Jonathan utterly trusts in God's plan for David. There's no frenemies. There's no schadenfreude. He can recognize that God's call to David helps and does not hurt his own calling. And as friends, they are so much stronger than they would be as enemies. So this is kind of my second prayer for this gathering, is that God will continue to help us to see and to follow God's calling, and that God will release us from the expectations that we have to be king, and instead it will let us be a source of support, to be an advocate, and to be a friend for others. So as friends, we're so much stronger than as enemies. And we can sort of let Jonathan be Jonathan and let David be David. We don't have to, God has given them each their own callings, and we don't have to make Jonathan into David or David into Jonathan. So in my third prayer today, I have to confess, like a fundraising Sunday. I don't know if you all, in the PCT, there's a tradition where every organization gets one Sunday of the calendar year to raise funds for itself. And today it's for Taiwan Seminary, which is the school where I teach on Yangmingshan. And for my seminary, it's November. And most of you know that the way I first came to Taiwan was through Taiwan Seminary. I came in 2005 for a year. And we lived on Yangmingshan, and I taught all in English for the year. And I still remember when Emily came. She came in February, and she left cold New Jersey and came to beautiful Taiwan and just fell in love. So, Taiwan Seminary has a unique place in the history of this area and also of the Presbyterian Church in Taiwan. It's a seminary on Yangmingshan, and we have about 80 students right now who are preparing to be pastors. And we also train musicians and counselors and theologians and Bible scholars. And I know some of you have taken classes at Taishan or Taiwan Shenxuyan, Taiwan Seminary, through our lay academy. And most of our pastors and many of our musicians and teachers are graduates of Taiwan Seminary. So if you know the Presbyterian Church here, you know that there are a lot of friendships. It still always kind of surprises me sometimes. I don't know if you have this experience. It's like often you can find 10 relationships through one person if you talk to them. You'll find out their uncle's an elder and their grandmother was a Bible teacher for 20 years and their two cousins are musicians. And I think that at its best, the institutions and our whole church operate like this, like they really are friends to each other. And until about 60 years ago, Taiwan Seminary was across the street from right across from street from Shuanglian, right at the Shuangi Dalo. And down the road is Mackay Hospital, which grew out of the work of George Mackay, who also started our seminary. So I think at their best, like Shuanglian and Taishan can be friends just like Jonathan and David are friends in the Bible. Sometimes, to be honest, there's a little bit of competition. Like if you know the Presbyterian history, like Tainan Seminary and Taiwan Seminary or the different places. But those always hurt the church rather than help it. So one of my prayers for us also is that we'll look to the friendships in the Bible and the covenants by God and see that as a chance to increase our own friendship also and to grow together. So my hope is that we try to love others as we love ourselves. I count this church and Taiwan Seminary as two close friends that I love dearly, and I hope that you'll love them also. And I know if you want to make a small offering to the seminary, people will be grateful. So in conclusion, Jonathan and David shared a type of friendship that was rare in the Bible, and it can still be rare for us today. I saw a study recently that said most Americans only have one or two close friends. You know, often it's pretty rare for us to have strong friendships. But through their covenant, Jonathan and David expected the best of each other, and they showed God's love. Oftentimes in life, we're told to look out for our own interests, or we're taught that God will love us more if others do worse. Sometimes I think this is the way the world teaches us, is that sort of if for one to succeed, the other has to fail. But instead, when we follow God, we can be free to be our truest selves, those who love God and love our neighbor. We can begin from friendship and from love of each other. No fear, no anxiety, no jealousy, just love, right? We can be comfortable in the callings God has given to us as we encourage others in their callings. We show God's love because we have received and know God's love, and we can free our friends to find their callings in the arms of Christ. We can strengthen those we love, even great and ancient institutions, and we can build each other up through study and exercise, through study and service, through mission and friendship. At the end of time, we trust that Christ will call all of us to a great banquet table where we will sit and share together as friends and fellow disciples. Let us pray.